Okay, I think we're ready to get underway. Appreciate everybody being here this morning. I think that seems better. That mic, that seems better. Yeah, just needed to be elevated, I guess. Better signal. That could have helped too. Okay, we're in lesson 11 of this study, and really the last image of God that we'll look at this morning. We have a kind of a culminating lesson next week that will hopefully draw everything together and bring everything together, and we'll move on to another study after this. But hope this has been beneficial, and hope of course this morning will be beneficial as well. Image of God as a gardener. So we've looked at shepherd, rock, peacemaker, builder, king, parent, potter, judge. Those are the ones we've looked at so far. Last week, image of God as a seeker. And we looked at some examples throughout Scripture of God as looking for us, looking out for us. And we hopefully stressed the idea that to God, lost things are important. That over and over again, Jesus talked about, especially in Luke 15, where we looked last week, of the things that had been lost were important. There was rejoicing when they were found. And the last story we looked at was the idea of the older brother and the story of the prodigal son. And at times when the lost make a decision, or when we're seeking the lost, that we can have an older brother attitude. So anybody want to explain what an older brother attitude is? For the people who weren't here last week, maybe. What's an older brother attitude? Anybody? Nobody took notes last week? Anybody? Older brother. What was the older brother's role in that?
I've clicked all the boxes and you don't seem to appreciate it.
That's right. God, why don't you appreciate me more, because I have been where I'm supposed to be the whole time, and I've done all the things I'm supposed to do, and why are you so excited about this person who's disregarded you for so long? And so we have to guard against, as we seek after the lost, or as the lost are found, we have to sort of battle against that older brother attitude. God continues to seek after us in our sin because he is filled with love. We can find ourselves sometimes in those scenarios, those situations, filled with something else, bitterness and envy and all of the things that would take us away from God. And God would want us to seek after the lost because we love them, and we're filled with love, and we're happy when they join the kingdom. So this morning, looking at the image of God as a gardener, and we're going to be mostly, like an overwhelming majority of the time, in John 15. Jesus here is preparing the disciples for his departure in John 15. He has been kind of hinting at, talking about that he's about ready to leave them, and there's a lot of deep conversation going on about how things will be for the disciples when he is gone, and the types of things that they need to be prepared for. And so that's the kind of the setting that we get in John 15, and specifically here talking about the imagery of a grapevine. Okay, so again, using something that the disciples might be familiar with to help them understand a greater principle about what life as a disciple is going to be like for them. And a grapevine is a really prolific plant. A single grapevine supports tons of branches. You guys have seen these. You drive past the research farm and you see grapevines there, and there's numerous branches, and certainly the grower hopes there's a much fruit that comes along with that. And a lot of discussion in this about branches in this story, or this interaction between Jesus and the disciples. And a branch isn't very much, right? It's something that carries nutrients out to the fruit or the leaves, water, nutrients from the trunk to get from the trunk to the leaves and the fruit. And by itself, a branch doesn't have much purpose. And unless you are really trained in it, just looking at a branch, really difficult to tell what kind of plant that it comes from. There's folks who can do that, I know, and probably some of our kids in the ag department can do that, but most of the time you pick up a stick and you can't recognize what kind of plant it came from. It's just something that we would throw away or burn. We recognize a branch when it's got fruit growing off of. That's kind of how we can recognize what sort of plant or tree it comes from. The fruit and the leaves that grow at the end of a branch is typically the best way to tell where it comes from. So that's the context of where we're at this morning. John 15, 1 and 2. John 15, 1 and 2. I am the true vine, and my Father is the gardener. He cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit, while every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes so that it will be even more fruitful. So we have two characters here in the first couple verses of 15. Jesus here is the vine, and he starts off with kind of the strange phrase, calling himself the true vine. So what does that imply when Jesus says, I'm the true vine? What can we infer into that? That aren't true, right? There are false vines or substitutes that are not as high quality as Jesus would be, and that's a little bit foreign to us, that discussion, but to the disciples, they would probably read into this something maybe different than would immediately come to our mind. So the image of a vine would be understood to be the nation of Israel, probably to the disciples at this time. And in fact, there are Psalms, and we're going to look at one later that sort of refers to the nation of Israel as the vine planted by God, and to the point where Israel had vines on their currency at one point prior to Jesus coming that symbolized the nation of Israel as the vine. So when Jesus says, I am the true vine, what he's telling them is that the future lies with him and not Israel. That the true vine, Jesus is saying, I'm here to fulfill everything Israel was supposed to be. Israel was supposed to carry God's love and character to the world, and Jesus now is like saying, I'm the true vine. Israel is no longer in that role. Jesus is saying he is where life and hope will come from now, and the perfection of what God planted. So when he first said, this is my chosen people, and this I'm going to reveal myself to the world, Jesus saying, I'm the true vine now. I'm replacing that. So lots of imagery as we move forward about being connected to this true vine. Important for Jesus to say, I'm in this role, and you got to stay connected to me. So God here is the second character in the first couple of verses, and God's referred to here as a gardener. And that's the image we want to get out of this morning, is this imagery of God as a gardener. And when we think about a gardener, it's someone who is obviously trying to grow something, but caring for that thing that he's trying to grow, and nurturing that and providing it with the things that it needs in order to be successful and to flourish. In this case, as a gardener of a grapevine. Now, anybody in here grow grapevines? It's not. I don't think it's a super easy thing to do. And here we get the idea of what it takes to be a gardener of a grapevine. There's apparently a lot of pruning involved with that. It brought to mind to me like the bonsai tree, Mr. Miyagi and the Karate Kid cutting back the bonsai tree, to make it grow. But that's maybe more relatable to me than any of you guys. So two types of pruning that takes place in this. Jesus tells the disciples that God as a gardener is going to cut off the branches that don't bear fruit. There's this idea of a separation. We've got the nutrients that are coming out of the ground and being carried up into the plant, and then going out into branches. And when those branches don't bear fruit, that's a waste of nutrients, right? That there's nothing that's going on there. So there's this idea of God as a gardener that's separating the branches that don't bear fruit. But it also brings this second idea to mind. God is going to prune the branches that do bear fruit so that they will be more successful and bear more fruit. So this cutting back kind of idea that God is, as a gardener, is doing it. And this is done presumably to promote growth, right? God is in the role here of sometimes disciplining the branches, for lack of a better term, in order to make them more successful and more productive. And so as we learn, as we move forward, this is us. This was the disciples then and the believers and the hearers then, and it continues to us today that we may be bearing fruit, but God's not done with us when we're bearing fruit, because he wants us to bear more fruit. And as a gardener, he's involved in that process with us. So we learn here early on in verses 1 and 2 that God cares about the branches. He wants to make them more fruitful, that he's the one who's deciding. He's judging that, which branches coming out of the vine are dead. God can judge that. He cuts those away. And so there's an allusion to judgment that comes along with that, right? That you're not living up to your expectations. You're cut away. But one of the things we're not as familiar with is this idea of I'm a perfectly fine branch. I got fruit coming out of me. I've got leaves growing. I've got fruit coming out. And yet God is still going to cut back that vine too. That's not something we're quite as familiar with or understand that quite as much. So any thoughts on that? Moving into verse 3. We're going to look a lot at what it means to be pruned by God this morning as the gardener. Okay. 3 through 5. 3 through 5. You are already clean because of the word I have spoken to you. Remain in me as I also remain in you. No branch can bear fruit by itself. It must remain in the vine. Neither you can bear fruit unless you remain in me. I am the vine. You are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. So Jesus sometimes would use these parables and these analogies and not completely explain to the disciples what it meant. He's going pretty much in depth here and saying, here's the parable I'm going to give you here. Here's the story I'm going to give you here. I'm going to tell you exactly what it means. He didn't want there to be any confusion about what he was talking about. So we get this third character here. Jesus' listeners are the branches. And in this case, it's the disciples talking to them. And he's saying, I am the vine, you are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you'll bear much fruit. Apart from me, you will do nothing. So these branches, they have to remain in Jesus as he remains in them. So this connection is important. We're going to talk about how we can tell if we're connected as we move forward, because Jesus kind of finishes this story by giving them some ideas about how they can tell. So you have to stay connected to the vine. We see that in verse 4 as well, and that there's this expectation as a branch that you're going to bear fruit, right? So some stark contrast between the branches that do bear fruit and the ones that don't. The ones that don't are cast aside. The ones that do are still pruned, but there's an expectation of them being productive. So how are we different than branches in the natural world? How are we different? We're branches connected to the vine that is Jesus. How are we different than a branch in the natural world? Other than the obvious, I guess. You're on top of it this morning, Wilbur. Okay, so a branch in your yard on a plant, it really can't choose to be disconnected from the vine. Although if you live in a yard like mine with a bunch of trees in it, you sometimes wonder if the branches are choosing to be disconnected because they're all over the place. But a branch in the natural world is not really able to say, it's time for me to disconnect. I'm just going to break myself off here, right? But we can do that as branches. We can choose to disconnect from the vine. We can choose to not be connected to Jesus. We can allow ourselves to be pruned. Maybe we wouldn't want to be cast aside, but sometimes by the actions that we bring upon ourselves or that we choose to do, we can be pruned because of the things we do. So the key to bearing fruit that we see in this section is you got to stay connected to the vine, right? And the branches that do not connect to the vine cannot bear fruit. This is contrary to what people outside of believers can't understand this, right? I do good things I bear fruit in the sense of what the world might think are positive things, but Jesus makes it pretty clear here. It doesn't matter what kind of fruit you're bearing if you're not connected to the vine. It's not real fruit, and there's going to be a limit to the fruit that you can bear if you're not connected to this vine. So, thoughts on that? Thoughts on that?
Maybe going there on the next slide, I don't know, but another difference is
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a choice that we can make to pursue that. It's what our calling is. We see that here, that we ought to be striving to find ways to produce fruit, and there's some accountability if you don't, right? And a branch can't choose how successful or prolific it's going to be. So.
And they're not grapevines, but I planted some blackberry bushes this year.
Yeah.
1 out of 3 has been productive. The others grow vines, branches, vines, whatever you call them, prolifically. I mean, they're very long, but they don't produce any fruit. I've been told it's likely because of the quality of the soil. So that we choose, to some degree, what soil we choose to put our roots down in.
Yeah. A plant can't. Yeah. Same thing happened to me a couple summers ago. I planted tomato plants, and they just were huge, taller than me, and I bet I got like 3 tomatoes the whole summer. They didn't had no product. It's frustrating, right? When you're the gardener, you planted these things, you expect it to bear fruit, and when it doesn't, we get a little bit of insight into how God must feel when we're choosing not to bear fruit, right? It's a frustration a little bit, and I wish it would bear more fruit, so I'm going to see if I can prune this and make it more prolific. So. Yes. Right. What's the difference? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right. So that I like that. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a effort on our part when the word abide is used. It's probably a better word than remain, because we would default to, kind of like we're here. We're remaining in the church this morning. We're sitting. I may not be very engaged, but here I am. But abide. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm. I like that word better. That's good. Thanks for sharing that. 6 through 8. If you do not remain in me, or abide in me, if you do not abide in me, you're like a branch that is thrown away and withers. Such branches are picked up, thrown into the fire, and burned. If you remain in me and my words remain in you, ask whatever you wish, and it will be done for you. This is to my Father's glory, that you bear much fruit, showing yourselves to be my disciples. So that last verse there, this to my Father's glory, that you bear much fruit. So the idea of as branches, the fruit that we produce is done to bring glory to God, which is our purpose, right? So branches disconnected from the vine, they're thrown away. They're useless. They don't bear fruit. So we need to distinguish between the teaching here. It's not bear fruit, and if you don't, you'll be cut off, because that's kind of what we are thinking of here. If you don't do anything, then you're going to be removed from the vine. And instead, we need to think of it as stay connected to Jesus, because that's the only way you could bear fruit in the first place, right? If you're not connected to the vine, you're not going to bear fruit, and you're going to be something that's useless to God. So stay connected to Jesus. It's the only way that the fruit that you will provide is going to be fruit that lasts and is sustaining and remains. And so if you don't end up bearing fruit, you're going to be thrown away. So bearing fruit is the evidence of being connected to Jesus, and it's an evidence of our identity as disciples, right, that we're connected there. So I'm going to dive into this a little bit further. So What can we take from this image of God, the gardener, pruning branches? Any thoughts on that? What are some applications we could make? So remember, it's not just cutting away what's dead, it's cutting on some branches that were alive and producing fruit. So what comes to mind when you see this? Right. Yeah. So you could almost trade those words out, right? Pruning and discipline go hand in hand. This idea of God knowing that we're productive now, but He knows how much more productive we might be. And so the actions that take place in our lives is order to make us produce more fruit. Anything else? So what does pruning mean? What does discipline that comes from God mean? It's almost as though God is taking away some things from us, or maybe another way of putting it is keeping us away from other things. Not because we're bad, not because it's a punishment, but God knows the influence of things in our life that can keep us from being as productive as we might be. And we may be doing some good things, but He might take away some of those good works. He might take away our ability to do something we would really want to do, so that we will focus on what He really wants us to do. And this is a hard thing for us to accept, right? I'm trying to do the best I can. I think in this role, I can be really successful, produce a lot of fruit, and God may see it differently and keep us from that opportunity because He sees something greater for us down the road. So sometimes the fruit we're producing is not the most fruit we could produce as a branch connected to the vine, right?
Shaping or reshaping, so that's what God's doing in our lives, is reshaping us. Yes, we may be productive, but He knows how we can be more productive. So
Yeah.
we pare away less productive things in our lives so that we can grow into being more productive.
It's kind of like the trees you see that are under the power lines, and they huge, beautiful trees, and they cut them way back to look like nothing, and then a few years later, they're even bigger and better than they were before. So you can't understand in the moment why would you take this beautiful tree and cut every branch off of it, and then you see in a few years what it looks like. And God has that foresight that we can't have. Why can't I have this opportunity? Why am I being held back in this way? Why are these things happening in my life? And God has that vision of the future that we can't have or don't have. So a couple of quotes. I don't really do this often, but there's a couple of quotes I think that maybe help us understand a little bit about what pruning looks like in our lives. So Warren Wiersbe, maybe some of you know who that is. He's kind of an older American clergyman and a teacher and a speaker and a writer. And he says it this way: your heavenly Father is never nearer to you than when He is pruning you. Sometimes He cuts away the dead wood that might cause trouble, but often He cuts off the living tissue that is robbing you of spiritual vigor. Pruning does not simply mean spiritual surgery that removes what is bad. It can also mean cutting away the good and the better so that we might enjoy the best. So pruning hurts. Yes, pruning hurts, but it also helps. We may not enjoy it, but we need it. So the image of God as a gardener who is carefully and lovingly wanting to bring out the best in us, sometimes it's going to hurt us. It's an idea of discipline, like David said, that we will maybe find ourselves disappointed or not understanding what's going on in the situation, and this is kind of a way of describing that. Another one that I think probably more people have heard of, C.S. Lewis, working through this problem, trying to explain it in his writings, his thought process. C.S. Lewis said that God really doesn't want there to be pain in our life, that it's not in God's will to have pain in our life as a whole, but to achieve a larger goal, maybe it might be something that's of use. So a big sliver in a splinter or a sliver in a child's finger, and digging out that splinter or that sliver is going to hurt. We've all been there. Something stuck in your hand or in your foot or something else where you need to get that out, and Doesn't feel very pleasant. And C.S. Lewis said, if God could have chosen a situation without pain, he would have. But relative to the danger of leaving the splinter or the sliver alone, he accepts the pain of removing it as necessary. So you got to have that gone, and in order for you to be the most productive. So there may be pain in the short term that leads us to a better situation in the long term. If you left that alone, it would get infected, it would cause problems, it would be harmful. And so C.S. Lewis tried to describe it in this way. That's what pruning looks like when it comes from God the gardener. So how does it feel to be pruned by God? Anybody have any examples that they would want to share? This is usually where everybody gets really quiet. Ever had a situation where you couldn't understand what was happening in the moment, but on the other side of it, you could look back and say, God was at work in this. I was hurt and disappointed, but now I can see where I was better off in the long run. Anybody want to share one of those? Yeah. Yeah, literally like what we were seeing, yeah. Do you feel like it's really hard to see that in the moment, and part of the pruning process to me seems almost like how you handle that situation can either lead you down a bad path or a good path. So the pruning takes place, but maybe, and this is just me talking, so feel free to disagree with me, but maybe if you choose the wrong path, the pruning won't work because you can't be objective and look back and see it. But if you can have that mindset of God's in control, God is the gardener in this situation, he knows why I'm going through this, I can accept this, and because I can accept it and look back, I can produce more fruit. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. To move forward, yeah. So God's interaction with us is no guarantee that the pain will go away. It's kind of what you're saying, and that's true. Yeah, you have a way to deal with it, and it spurs you on to something bigger if you allow it to do that.
Personal experience several years ago when I was living in Austin. Sometimes the pruning you get is because you allow God to do it. You become vulnerable and you put yourself in situations where you allow that to happen. I was in a men's small group for 15 years. We met on Monday mornings, and we were vulnerable with each other. It was not only a study group, but it was an accountability group.
Mm-hmm.
And there were 3 or 4 times every year where every man reported how he was doing in his relationship with his family, his job, his relationship with God, and areas where he wanted to be held accountable and things like that. And that was approved.
Yeah.
But it was something that you submitted yourself to and committed to, and boy, that was just invaluable.
It's an acceptance of this teaching, willing. I'm going to walk into this situation to be pruned with the support of other Christians around me. Yeah. Any other thoughts? Anybody want to share? So just an example. We may be busy and involved in good work, and even sometimes a ministry at church, and lose that through health or finance or whatever. And so we're doing something that would have produced good fruit, but maybe God takes that opportunity away so that we can concentrate on something else that might be more important to him at the time, and maybe need to get healthy ourselves as Christians so that we can produce even better fruit in the future. So if God is slamming a door on us, if you feel like that's happening, or we're going through a painful time, or disappointment or hurt, the perspective that we need, kind of like talking with Mark earlier, is the perspective we need is to be looking for that as a pruning, right? What can I gain from this to be stronger in the future as I'm going through this difficult time? What is God trying to teach me through this so that I can produce better fruit in the future? So hopefully that makes sense. Any other thoughts? We move on to the other part. So the second part of this teaching is really this image of branches connected to a vine, and Jesus being that vine. And so the main truth really that Christ is teaching in this is the importance of abiding in him to bear fruit, and how the only fruit that really matters is the fruit that we produce because we're connected to Christ as the vine, like a branch connected to a vine. So disconnected from Christ is death to us. We're useless, and a branch disconnected from the vine can't do anything. And so this idea that the branch cannot produce its own life, it draws its life from the vine. And just like that, if we're not connected to Jesus, then we're not going to produce the kind of fruit that God is looking for. And we need to gain the perspective here through this that branches are not that important alone and on their own, not islands or independent, but if we are connected to Jesus, then that's how we'll be productive, and that's how we're going to produce fruit. That we can't do those kind of things on our own, and it wouldn't matter even if we could. The stark contrast between the two. So this is a psalm, kind of an image of God as a gardener. It's not unique to this story in John. Some similar imagery here. It's probably better fit back at the beginning than it is here. But Psalm 88 through 18, it's a prayer for restoration, a prayer for revival after a time of destruction. You transplanted a vine from Egypt. You drove out the nations and planted it. You cleared the ground for it, and it took root and filled the land. The mountains were covered with its shade. The mighty cedars with its branches reached as far as the sea, and its shoots as far as the river. Why have you broken down its walls so that all who pass by pick its grapes? Boars from the forest ravage it, and insects from the fields feed on it. Return to us, God Almighty. Look down from heaven and see. Watch over this vine. The root your right hand has planted, the son you have raised up for yourself. Your vine is cut down, is burned with fire at your rebuke, that your people perish. Let your hand rest on the man at your right hand, the Son of Man you have raised up for yourself. Then we will not turn away from you. Revive us, we will call on your name. So Psalm 80 making this plea that God's going to restore mercy to Israel, the people he chose to bring his message into the world. So the imagery we get in like 8 through 11 is Israel as the vine. And then there, at 12 through 15, there's kind of this reference to the fact that it's being destroyed. And why would you destroy this great vine that you planted to reveal yourself to the world? And then 16 through 18 is kind of this reference to what's to come that maybe would replace this vine. So it's not unique to the New Testament, this imagery. And at some point, the disciples had to probably think back on this passage and be struck at how Jesus is pulling out a lot of the same words and phrases that the psalmist had used to describe Israel. So this vine, the son you have raised up for yourself, the man at your right hand, the Son of Man, the disciples could see these are the words that Jesus was using to describe himself, and that imagery we got at the end of Psalm 80. So it's almost like transitioning from the God as a gardener of the nation of Israel to a gardener in the lives in each and every one of us. Probably better said in a different way, that rather than Israel being the vine that's planted to reveal God to the world, Jesus has come to fulfill that. And then as we are connected to Jesus, God's at work pruning us, intending to us, and trying to make us as prolific as possible as a shift there, that Israel was imperfect, and so God allowed it to be pruned and passed away so that Jesus could replace that. That was something better in the long run. So, any thoughts on that?
I think Jesus tells us in context here, John 15, why he's telling us about remaining in the vine and being pruned, and boy, it sounds pretty. He says, "I'm telling you this so that my joy might be
Yeah.
joy." I mean, the result is
You-
joy,
yeah.
and that your joy
May be complete.
mature,
Mhm.
may be fulfilled. So the whole result of this is joy, and that's what I'm trying to focus on. When does the joy come?
Uh-huh.
And it may be because of the Father had joy in Jesus because he submitted to his will.
Mm-hmm.
And when we submit to Jesus' will, whether it be blessing or pruning, he has joy in us, and then we can experience that same joy. But there's joy somewhere in here to be experienced.
That's right. It's on the next slide. You're on the right track though. Yeah, thank you, David. And that's right. And we have a little bit of influence and control there, right? How we handle the situations in our lives, the disappointments, and we don't understand, and what's in it for us, what's in it for God. As we finish the story in John 15, 9 through 17, kind of answering the question, how can we tell if we are well connected to the vine? As the Father loved me, so I have loved you. Now remain in my love. If you keep my commands, you will remain in my love, just as I kept my Father's commands. So there's this idea of how do you remain in the vine? You keep my commands. I have told you this so that my joy may be in you and that your joy may be complete. My command is this: love each other as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. You are my friends. If you do what I command, you are my friends if you do what I command. I no longer call you servants, because a servant does not know his master's business. Instead, I have called you friends, for everything that I learned from my Father I have made known to you. You did not choose me, but I chose you. So that image of seeking again, and appointed you that you might go and bear fruit that will last, and so that whatever you ask in my name, the Father will give you. This is my command: love each other. So how do we tell if we're well connected to the vine, and what are we supposed to do as branches? So Jesus has set up this visual of a tree being connected from the root to the furthest branch, and making sure that we have this picture of the branches carrying water, nutrients from the vine to the branch, and he says now that the branches are serving this purpose, right? And if you'll serve this purpose, then you'll have joy, and my joy is going to be made complete. So the branches are conduits for bearing fruit, and he says 2 times in this passage, Jesus does, that my command is to love each other as I have loved you. And again, he finished up that section by saying, love each other. So our purpose as branches is to carry God's love to others. So to fulfill that purpose, we have to stay connected to the vine. So we have to stay connected to Jesus, so that love that Jesus had, we are conduits of that to others. That's the fruit that we're looking to bear here. And obviously there's references to fruit all throughout the New Testament, and all of that would be good fruit. In this case, there's a stress here of the love that we share with others. And so sometimes, to be better conduits, producers of fruit, this image of God pruning us so that we can better show God's love to others as branches connected to the vine. So, thoughts on that as we wrap up here this morning? Mm-hmm. And we're kind of told in multiple places exactly what that fruit looks like, aren't we? Yeah.
Some of the fruit
Sometimes the blemishes that people can see, the things that have gone wrong in our lives, that if we can still be conduits of love despite the blemishes we have, the scars we carry, and the things we've been through, that's how we can best produce that fruit. Because, yeah, yeah, yeah. Look like you have everything together, and maybe inside you don't. And it doesn't take long to figure those things out, does it? Any other thoughts? Okay, so next week, we're going to wrap this study up. What does it look like to be in the image of God? Going to kind of try to hopefully bring all the 11 previous lessons together into one. So if you would, join me in prayer. God, thankful for the opportunity to be together this morning. We're thankful that we can gather together here and worship you with fellow believers. God, we'd pray this morning that you would help us through our words and our practices and our habits to stay connected to Jesus, who is the true vine, and may that connection to him bear much fruit, and that fruit would glorify you. And God, in times of trial, may we seek the opportunities for growth and change that you, as the gardener, may be cultivating within us. We would ask your blessing upon the time that we have together this morning to worship, and ask all these things in Jesus' name. Amen.